The bright lights of the studio gleamed as Keanu Reeves settled into the plush red chair across from Jimmy, the cheerful talk show host. Keanu wore his usual black suit with no tie, his hair slightly longer than usual, brushing against his shoulders. The audience had just finished applauding and now waited in eager silence. "So, Keanu," Jimmy began, leaning forward with his trademark grin, "let's talk about your new movie. I heard the stunts were even crazier this time around." Keanu nodded, his lips curving into that gentle smile fans around the world had come to love. "Yeah, the team really pushed the limits. We spent 6 months just practicing for the motorcycle chase scene." The conversation flowed easily as they discussed his recent charity work with children's hospitals and his continuing passion for motorcycles. The audience laughed at all the right moments, completely unaware that this ordinary interview was about to take an extraordinary turn. "You know," Jimmy said, glancing at his question cards, "you're known for being quite philosophical. Has that influenced your spiritual views at all?" Something shifted in Keanu's expression, a subtle change that wouldn't have been noticeable if the cameras hadn't zoomed in at that exact moment. He hesitated, fidgeting with the water glass on the small table beside him. "Actually," Keanu said slowly, "I had an interesting experience a few months back. I don't think I've mentioned this publicly before." He paused, as if reconsidering, then continued. "During a humanitarian trip to Rome, I was granted a private audience with Pope Francis." A murmur of interest rippled through the audience. Jimmy's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Wow, that's incredible. What was that like?" Keanu looked down, his fingers now tapping lightly against his knee. He was very kind, very humble. But something happened during that meeting that I can't stop thinking about. The studio had grown so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. We were talking about how different religions often create walls between people, and Keanu took a deep breath. He told me about something hidden within the Vatican. A collection, not just of books, but of teachings and traditions, that has been kept secret for centuries. Ancient texts that show the common roots of all major religions. Jimmy blinked rapidly, clearly uncertain if this was a joke or promotion for a new movie. "Wait, are you saying the Pope revealed some kind of Vatican secret to you?" He talked about a hidden library that contains proof that all spiritual paths lead to the same truth. Texts that could potentially unite rather than divide the world's religions. The words tumbled out now, as if Keanu couldn't stop them. "I promised not to share this, but I've been thinking, don't people deserve to know?" In the control room, producers frantically gestured, unsure whether to cut to commercial. Jimmy nervously cleared his throat, trying to steer the conversation back to safer territory. "That's fascinating. Let's talk about your upcoming projects." But the damage was done. Phones throughout the audience glowed as people frantically typed messages and posted clips online. Behind the cameras, network executives were already receiving calls. Keanu suddenly seemed to realize what he had done. His eyes widened slightly as he looked directly into camera 3, millions of viewers around the world seeing the conflict written across his face, regret mixed with a strange sense of purpose. He hadn't planned this revelation, but now that the words were out, there was no taking them back. And somewhere deep inside, despite knowing the chaos that would follow, he felt an odd sense of relief. The truth, or what he believed to be the truth, was finally out. By morning, the clip had gone viral. #KeanuAnthipoped was trending worldwide, and news channels had dropped their regular programming to cover what people were calling the Vatican revelation. Keanu's phone wouldn't stop ringing. His longtime friend and agent Tom had called 17 times already. Outside his Los Angeles home, reporters camped along the street, cameras pointed at his gates, hoping to catch a glimpse of the actor who had suddenly become the center of a global religious storm. "You need to make a statement," Tom urged when Keanu finally answered. "This is getting out of hand." But Keanu just stared through his living room window at the media circus outside. "I need time to think," he said quietly before hanging up. Meanwhile, in Rome, Vatican officials scrambled to contain the situation. Father Giovanni, the Vatican's press secretary, stood before a room packed with journalists, his face stern under the harsh lights. "Mr. Reeves did meet with His Holiness during a charity event 3 months ago," he admitted reluctantly. But the conversation was brief and touched only on Mr. Reeves' humanitarian efforts. Any suggestion of secret libraries or hidden texts is simply a misunderstanding, or perhaps a joke taken out of context. No one believed it, especially when Professor Lai, a religious historian from Beijing University, appeared on CNN pointing out ancient references to hidden Christian texts that aligned perfectly with what Keanu had described. There have been rumors of these collections for centuries, the professor explained, pushing his glasses up his nose. Scholars have dismissed them as myths, but perhaps we were too quick to judge. Social media couldn't get enough. People shared old paintings that supposedly contained clues about the library's location. Reddit threads analyzed every word of Keanu's statement, searching for hidden meanings. Twitter crashed twice under the traffic surge. Religious leaders from around the world demanded answers. The Grand Imam of Al-Azhar called for transparency. The Dalai Lama, in his typical fashion, simply smiled when asked and said, "Truth has many doorways." 3 days after the interview, a photo appeared online. It showed Keanu and Pope Francis sitting alone in the Pope's private study, not in a public meeting room where dignitaries were usually received. The Vatican had no choice but to acknowledge that the meeting had been more than just a brief handshake. His Holiness often has private conversations with influential figures who can help promote peace and understanding, Father Giovanni explained, looking increasingly uncomfortable. But these conversations are confidential and often metaphorical in nature. People weren't buying it. Conspiracy theories flourished. Some claimed the library contained evidence of alien contact. Others insisted it held proof that Jesus had traveled to India. The more outlandish the theory, the faster it seemed to spread. Through it all, Pope Francis remained silent. His usual Wednesday public audience was cancelled due to health concerns, something that hadn't happened in years. Keanu had gone completely off the grid. Not even his closest friends knew where he was. His housekeeper told reporters he had left in the middle of the night with just a backpack and his motorcycle. On day 5, the mainstream news finally got something new to report when Bobby, a tour guide at the Vatican museums, came forward claiming he had seen unusual activity in the restricted archives section just weeks before Keanu's visit. They were moving old crates with special climate-controlled containers, he told a reporter from the BBC. "I've worked here for 12 years and never seen anything like it. When I asked about it, my supervisor told me it was just routine maintenance. But they didn't look like maintenance workers to me." By the end of the week, what had started as an unexpected comment on a talk show had turned into a global phenomenon. Historians, religious scholars, and everyday people all found themselves asking the same question. What if it was true? What if, hidden somewhere beneath the Vatican's marble floors, there really was proof that all religions shared the same roots? And where was Keanu Reeves? On the 7th day after Keanu's revelation, the Vatican finally announced that Pope Francis would address the situation. News crews from around the world descended on St. Peter's Square, setting up equipment before dawn. By noon, the square was packed with thousands of people, their faces turned expectantly toward the Pope's balcony. At exactly 12:30, Pope Francis appeared. Despite rumors of illness, he looked calm and rested as he stepped up to the microphone. The crowd fell silent. "My dear children," he began, his voice carrying across the square. "In these days of confusion, I come to bring clarity." He paused, his eyes scanning the sea of faces. "It is true that I met with Mr. Reeves during his visit to Rome. We spoke of many things, of compassion, of service to others, of building bridges between people of different beliefs." The Pope folded his hands, his expression thoughtful. "But I fear there has been a misunderstanding. We discussed no secret library in the literal sense. Our conversation was about the common threads that run through all faiths, the universal truths that connect us rather than divide us." Journalists scribbled frantically in their notebooks. Photographers' cameras clicked in rapid succession. "These truths," the Pope continued, "are not hidden in some dusty archive. They live in the hearts of all who seek goodness and light." He smiled gently. "Mr. Reeves is a thoughtful man with a poetic soul. Perhaps he understood our metaphorical discussion as something more concrete. It was a perfect response, gracious, clear, and completely believable." The tension in the square began to ease. Some people even nodded in understanding. This made sense. It had all been a simple misunderstanding. But then the Pope did something unexpected. Instead of ending his address, he quoted from what seemed to be a poem. "When stones of ancient walls could speak, their whispers guide the ones who seek. 3 parts converge where waters meet. The truth lies waiting at your feet." A puzzled murmur ran through the crowd. The Pope blessed the gathered faithful and withdrew from the balcony, leaving everyone wondering about those strange final words. Within hours, religious scholars around the world had identified the quote. It wasn't from any well-known scripture or prayer. Instead, it came from an obscure 12th century text attributed to a monk who had reportedly been entrusted with protecting Vatican secrets. For centuries, some had claimed the poem contained coded directions to hidden religious treasures. Why would the Pope quote such a text if there was no secret to find? As night fell over Rome, the debate raged on news channels and social media. Had the Pope just denied the library's existence, or had he actually confirmed it with that cryptic poem? Meanwhile, at Keanu's hillside home in California, something strange was happening. Security cameras caught the moment when 3 dark SUVs pulled up to his gates around midnight. Men in black suits quickly disabled the alarm system and entered the property. 20 minutes later, they left. The next morning, Keanu's housekeeper arrived to find the house undisturbed but empty. On the kitchen counter was a handwritten note in Keanu's distinctive scrawl. It contained just 5 Latin words. Veritas in tenebris lucet, truth shines in darkness. When police investigated, they found no signs of struggle or forced entry. Keanu's passport was still in his desk drawer. His motorcycle remained in the garage. It was as if he had simply walked out and vanished. The housekeeper told police something else. Strange men had been watching the house for days before Keanu disappeared. They didn't look like normal reporters, she said, her voice shaking. They were too organized. As news of Keanu's disappearance spread, the story took a darker turn. Was this a publicity stunt gone wrong? Had Keanu gone into hiding after revealing something he shouldn't have? Or was something more sinister at work? The truth, as it turned out, was stranger than anyone could have imagined. 2 weeks after Keanu's disappearance, the first real lead emerged. A teenager hiking in the Italian countryside posted a photo on social media that quickly went viral. In the background, barely noticeable until someone enhanced the image, was a man who looked remarkably like Keanu Reeves. He was dressed in simple clothes, his beard longer than usual, standing outside what appeared to be a stone monastery. Internet detectives quickly identified the location as the Monastery of St. Benedict, a 1,000-year-old building nestled in the hills about 2 hours from Rome. The monastery was known for its ancient library, one of the oldest still in use. By the time reporters reached the site, the monks denied any knowledge of Keanu's presence. "We welcome many visitors seeking peace and knowledge," the head monk told the crowd of journalists. "We do not discuss who comes to our doors." Meanwhile, the Pope's cryptic poem had set off a different kind of treasure hunt. Based on the lines 3 paths converge where waters meet, researchers identified 3 possible locations: a specific fountain in Rome, an ancient baptismal site in Jerusalem, and an old cistern beneath a church in Istanbul. Amateur treasure hunters descended on all 3 sites, forcing local authorities to close them to the public. In Rome, 2 American tourists were arrested after trying to pry loose stones from a 4th century fountain. "This is getting out of hand," Police Chief Russo told reporters. "We're dealing with important historical sites, not some game." As the world fixated on these treasure hunts, a quieter development unfolded behind the scenes. Sister Anna, a librarian who had worked in the Vatican archives for over 30 years, reached out to Keanu's agent Tom. Their meeting in a small cafe outside Rome went unnoticed by the press. "He's safe," she told Tom, her voice barely above a whisper. "But there are people who don't want this truth to come out, people within the church itself." Tom leaned forward. "Where is he?" "I can't tell you exactly," Sister Anna replied. "But he's studying ancient texts with people who have protected this knowledge for generations. The monks at St. Benedict's are helping him, but he's not staying there anymore. It was too risky after that photo leaked." "What knowledge?" Tom asked. "What did the Pope really tell him?" Sister Anna glanced around nervously before answering. The Pope confirmed something Keanu had already begun to suspect through his own studies of philosophy. There are texts, not just Christian ones, but from many traditions, that tell the same spiritual story. They've been kept separate to maintain power structures within organized religions. Tom sat back stunned. And Keanu just happened to stumble onto this? Nothing happens by accident, Sister Anna smiled. Keanu has been searching for meaning his whole life. Perhaps he was meant to be the messenger. She slid a small device across the table. He wants to speak to representatives from different faiths. People he can trust won't twist his words. Can you help arrange that? While Tom worked on contacting religious leaders who might be sympathetic, public interest in the story began to wane. With no new developments, news outlets moved on to fresher scandals. Then, exactly 1 month after the original talk show revelation, a video call was arranged. 5 religious leaders from different traditions gathered in a secure room in Geneva. A Buddhist monk, a rabbi, an imam, a Hindu priest, and a Protestant minister. They had been told only that they would speak with someone who had important information about the shared roots of their faiths. When the screen flickered to life, they found themselves looking at Keanu Reeves, but he seemed somehow changed. His face was thinner, his eyes more intense. Beside him stood a white-haired monk holding an ancient leather-bound book. "Thank you for coming," Keanu said. "What I'm about to show you will change everything you thought you knew about your own traditions." The religious leaders leaned forward as the old monk carefully opened the book to reveal text in a language none of them had ever seen before. The 5 religious leaders stared at the screen in confusion. The old monk beside Keanu turned the ancient book to show its pages. The strange symbols glowed faintly in the dim light of wherever they were broadcasting from. "This text predates all of your religious writings," Keanu explained, his voice deeper and more confident than anyone remembered from his movies. "Scholars have protected it for thousands of years, passing it from generation to generation." Rabbi David leaned forward. "What language is that? It doesn't look like ancient Hebrew or Aramaic." "That's because it isn't," Keanu replied. "This writing system was created specifically to record spiritual experiences in a way that couldn't be misinterpreted. The symbols don't represent words, they represent states of consciousness." The Buddhist monk, Brother Tenzin, nodded slowly. "Like the states we reach in deep meditation." "Exactly," Keanu said. And here's where, 3 days after Keanu's video call, someone leaked the recording online. Within hours, it had been viewed millions of times. The religious leaders who had participated immediately faced backlash from the more conservative members of their communities. Rabbi David was called before his synagogue's board to explain himself. Brother Tenzin's monastery issued a statement distancing themselves from his unauthorized discussions. Imam Farouk received threatening phone calls. Reverend Johnson found the word traitor spray-painted on his church door. Meanwhile, major news networks ran segments questioning Keanu's mental health. A famous psychiatrist who had never met the actor suggested he might be suffering from delusions of spiritual grandeur. Late-night comedians turned the whole thing into jokes about Keanu's movie roles. "First he was the one in The Matrix," one comedian quipped, "and now he thinks he's the one who's going to unite all religions. What's next? World peace through excellent air guitar." But something unexpected happened. As more people watched the leaked video, many found themselves moved by Keanu's sincerity. They noticed how he wasn't trying to position himself as a new religious leader or prophet. He wasn't asking for money or followers. He just seemed like a guy who had found something important and wanted to share it. Online forums sprang up where people from different religious backgrounds discussed the possibility that their traditions might share common roots. The hashtag #OnTruthManyPaths started trending, with people sharing stories of their own spiritual experiences that transcended religious boundaries. One popular post came from a college student in Ohio. "I was raised Christian but always felt something was missing. Started practicing Buddhist meditation last year and found myself feeling closer to God than ever before. Maybe Keanu's onto something." As public opinion began to shift, powerful figures moved to shut down the conversation. 3 major religious television networks ran coordinated segments suggesting that Keanu had joined a dangerous cult. Online articles appeared questioning his connections to extremist groups, though no specific groups were ever named. The monastery where Keanu had been spotted was raided by local police, claiming they had received reports of suspicious activity. They found nothing except confused monks and ancient books in Latin. Through it all, Pope Francis remained strangely silent. His weekly addresses carefully avoided any mention of the controversy. But Vatican insiders noticed he had begun meeting with progressive religious scholars from various traditions, people known for their work on interfaith dialogue. Then came the death threats. Keanu's agent Tom received an anonymous message warning that those who threaten the foundations will be buried beneath them. The next day, someone broke into Sister Anna's apartment. She wasn't harmed, but her research materials were stolen. They're scared, Brother Joseph told Keanu as they moved to yet another safe house, this one high in the mountains of Nepal. People in power always fear the truth that might make them irrelevant. Keanu looked out at the snow-capped peaks. I never wanted this fight. I just couldn't keep the truth to myself once I knew it. No one ever chooses to be a messenger, the old monk replied. The message chooses them. That night, Keanu couldn't sleep. Outside his window, the stars seemed impossibly bright. He thought about his life, the fame, the movies, the fortune he'd accumulated. None of it seemed important compared to what he'd discovered. But he also thought about the people being hurt because of his revelation. Was truth worth the cost? His phone buzzed, a secure messaging app used only by Tom. The message was brief. The Pope wants to meet. Privately. Attached was a photo of a handwritten note in the Pope's distinctive script. Mr. Reeves, perhaps it is time we finished our conversation. Some truths cannot remain hidden once they begin to emerge. I believe we must work together now. As Keanu stared at the message, another notification appeared. Someone had posted footage online of ordinary people from different religions gathering together in parks and community centers around the world, sharing their traditions with each other, inspired by the leaked video. Keanu showed the phone to Brother Joseph. Maybe we're not alone in this after all. The old monk smiled. You never were. The United Nations headquarters in New York buzzed with excitement. Security was tighter than anyone could remember. Leaders from every major religion had gathered in the Grand Assembly Hall, along with diplomats, journalists, and representatives from countries around the world. Rumors had been circulating for weeks. After months of controversy, Keanu Reeves and Pope Francis were going to appear together publicly for the first time. No one knew exactly what they planned to announce. Outside, crowds filled the streets. Some held signs supporting Keanu's message of religious unity. Others protested against what they called the destruction of true faith. Police worked to keep the groups separated. Inside the building, Keanu waited in a small room, staring out the window at the crowds below. He had changed in the months since his talk show appearance. His face was thinner, more weathered. His eyes carried a depth that hadn't been there before. Nervous? Asked Brother Joseph, adjusting his simple brown robe. Keanu smiled. Not anymore. Whatever happens today, the truth is already out there. The door opened and Pope Francis entered, accompanied only by Sister Anna. At 88 years old, he moved slowly, but his eyes remained sharp and alert. Mr. Reeves, he said, extending his hand. I believe we have started something that we must now finish together. The two men who had sparked a global spiritual conversation embraced like old friends. 20 minutes later, they walked side by side onto the stage of the assembly hall. The room fell silent as Pope Francis stepped to the microphone. My friends, he began, his voice steady despite his age. Throughout history, humanity has searched for meaning in many different ways. We have built walls between our faiths, convinced that only our path leads to truth. He paused, looking out at the diverse crowd. But what if these walls were never meant to exist? What if, at the deepest level, we are all describing the same divine reality with different words and symbols? A murmur ran through the audience. The Pope continued, after much prayer and contemplation, I have come to believe that the time has come for greater transparency. Today, I announce the formation of the Interfaith Heritage Council, which will oversee the gradual sharing of spiritual knowledge that has too long been kept separate. Keanu stepped forward. This council will include representatives from all major religions, as well as scholars and ordinary people who simply seek truth. Its first task will be to examine the ancient texts that show the common origins of our spiritual traditions. On the massive screen behind them appeared images of the strange symbols Keanu had shown the religious leaders months ago. These texts don't belong to any single religion, he explained. They belong to all of humanity. Not everyone was convinced. the head of a powerful religious organization, stood up from his seat. "This is blasphemy," he shouted. "You would destroy traditions thousands of years old." Pope Francis responded with unexpected firmness. "We seek not to destroy but to fulfill. In our protection of tradition, we sometimes forget that faith must breathe to live. Truth is not threatened by more truth." Over the next 2 hours, religious leaders took turns at the microphone. Some voiced support, others expressed concerns. The debate was passionate but respectful. By the end, most agreed that further study was warranted, even if they weren't yet ready to embrace all the conclusions. 3 months later, Keanu returned to the same talk show where it had all begun. Jimmy, the host, seemed nervous as Keanu took his seat. "So," Jimmy began, "last time you were here, you kind of turned the world upside down. Any regrets?" The audience laughed, breaking the tension. Keanu thought for a moment before answering. "You know, I never set out to challenge anyone's faith," he said. "I just couldn't keep silent about something so important. But the most beautiful part has been watching what's happened since. People from different traditions actually talking to each other, sharing their practices, finding common ground. And the death threats, the attempts to discredit you." Keanu shrugged. "Change is always hard. Some people are afraid of losing what they have. But I think most people are hungry for connection, for meaning that goes beyond boundaries." Jimmy leaned forward. "If you could go back to that first interview, knowing everything that would happen, would you still have said what you did?" Keanu's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "The most important truths aren't owned, they're shared. And sometimes the world is ready before we realize it." As the audience applauded, millions watching at home felt something stir within them, a hope that perhaps the walls that had divided humanity for so long might finally be coming down. The end.